Opticare was formed simply to be able to tender for this contract. So it wasn't like, I want to become a wholesaler, I want to make lenses. It was basically the necessity to have the resources to get pricing at a good price to win the tender. We put in our tender in 1984 and we got the contract.
We won it.
The first time in 25 years, APSM lost it.
Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. In each episode, we bring together leaders from optometry, optical dispensing, and business to share insights, practical strategies, and the latest developments shaping independent practice today. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore how innovation, collaboration, and smart business thinking can drive growth, enhance patient care, and strengthen the future of independent optometry. Whether you're a student, an early career professional, or an established practice owner, The Focused View is your go-to source for knowledge, inspiration, and connection. The Focused View is brought to you by Vision Connection, supporting independent eye care professionals across Australia through collaboration, education, and business growth. By working closely with leading suppliers and industry partners, Vision Connection offers unique opportunities that help independents stand out and succeed. To find out more, visit their website, visionconnection.com.au. Dad, welcome to the show.
Thank you, son. It's nice to be here after all these years of having you around.
Yeah, so obviously, you might be surprised to know, but out of everyone that I speak to, everyone always asks me when I'm interviewing you or when we're going to go through the Opticare story. So this has definitely been one that's been requested a lot. So really excited to have you on and excited to talk about, I guess, all things Opticare and all things yourself.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Well, so if we get going, for those that don't know you, can you give us a bit of a background as to who you are and a bit of your story?
Well, basically, I started university not doing optometry. I actually started doing architecture. And I was back in 1970, 72, 73. I did my Bachelor of Science in Architecture first. And at that particular time, I think around 1974, 75, there was a huge, not depression, but the building industry was in a downturn. And a lot of my tutors doing architecture were actually working as taxi drivers. And I ran into an old school friend of mine, Larry Pressridge, who was in the optometry building next door to the architecture building. And he started chatting to me and said, why don't you do optometry? So I've always been someone who's wanted to control my own destiny, and optometry and architecture have that in common. And being a bit more medical as well, and made it a bit more interesting in a way, in that it was a helping profession. So I took what he said on board, and then I enrolled in optometry in 1976 after having spent a year overseas, and I graduated in 1980. So that's basically the background.
So you mentioned that you didn't intentionally start optometry. You started off doing architecture. There was something economically that occurred which made you think about something a little bit different. And you mentioned Larry. So what was it about what Larry suggested to you in that course that in architecture that made you think, you know what, I will make this decision. I'll jump from architecture over to optometry, because it seems to be quite a big difference.
Oh, really not from the way that I think. I mean, for me, as I said, the goal is to be in control of my own destiny, whether it was architecture or another profession. The aim for me was always to have my own business in a way, to control my own destiny is a better thing to use. And I've basically been brought up like that, because even from a very young age, when I was 6, 7 years old, my parents owned a corner takeaway shop and an environment where we controlled our destiny. So I was brought up with that atmosphere. used to go to school and then go to work. But to me, it wasn't really work. It was helping the family, and we were working together to a common goal. So it may seem strange to other people, but the way that I was brought up, it was just a natural progression to do something that I could control.
So I guess you saw that ability in optics or optometry at that point in time, as you did with architecture. So there was that connection made from that point of view.
Larry basically was an instigator. Hadn't been a downturn in the architecture industry, building industry, this wouldn't have happened. I would continue doing architecture, and who knows what would have happened.
And there are a few things that you've mentioned there, which I think will be common throughout our chats, because we're going to obviously take this over 3 parts, and today we're really focusing on that birth of Opticare and the origins of it all. But mentioning that having control of your own destiny was a big thing, and that obviously speaks to the independence and the independent nature with regards to, I guess, a theme or a recurring theme that we'll speak about. But also, the concept of family, obviously, it goes without saying that there's a big understanding on that. And obviously, as a company and being involved in the company, that family aspect is a very big part. So I guess there are 2 things that initially on we see that's really critical. Were you always a bit of a rule challenger, I guess, with what you were doing? And I know that there's a reference to a curtain story. And can you speak more to that nature and that side of you?
I was the sort of person who would take a glass as being half full, not half empty. Worked hard at high school. I basically pushed myself to a comfortable limit. Was actually where I was school captain. Being an immigrant, a challenge to get to. But what got me to be school captain wasn't the teacher so much as the confidence of the students behind me. They sort of voted me in instead of my best friend as school captain, simply because they felt more bonded to me. They felt that connection somehow. So I think it's sort of always been there subliminally, but I have that ability to sort of enthuse people, to get them to feel and to be themselves. And it's hard to describe, but out of that, I created a philosophy that I carry on to this day from high school, when I wrote in the school magazine that if something was possible, you would achieve it. If something was impossible, you must achieve it. I think that's been a thing in my head since 1969. Nothing new.
Mm. And the curtain story. What's the curtain story about?
Okay. So we graduated in 1980, and I purchased a practice that was just a new practice, about 12 months old. And I was financed by family, of course, because I had no money. And when we graduated in 1980, shop fronts didn't exist as we know it today. Every optometry practice had to have a curtain in front of it. People were not allowed, the public were not allowed to see inside your optometry practice. I was a bit of a renegade, along with about 5 other optometrists, and this was a ruling that was put onto us by the Optometry Association. So if you wanted to be a member of the association, you could not display frames in your window. So what we did, we actually fought that. We removed our curtains.
Okay.
And there was a few of us, I won't mention any names, but we actually got that through. And I'm not quite sure when, maybe at the end of 1980, curtains were lifted, so to speak.
Right.
They were no more.
So is it fair to say that you had a part to play in
Absolutely.
that? Why curtains? No, that's
very
news to me.
Anti-establishment at that time.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, obviously, the school captain story, and obviously at the time, I guess in that time of history with regards to, being so long ago, it obviously is a very different environment to what it is today with regards to, being an immigrant and the like. And so, having that difficulty sort of, throughout high school, and then obviously getting into the optics side of things and obviously having certain rules, and then that little shift there. And that's pretty monumental considering how established that would have been at the time. It goes a little bit with regards to, what drives you and I guess what inspires you to sort of think, well, let's change the status quo. And I think it's very fitting for an independent business owner.
Well, you need to be objective and you need to look at the whole situation. And you've got to question. You've got to question things. And even when I'm doing mentoring when I was doing mentoring at the university, my talk would be, anything I say, I want you to question. Don't take what I say to you for granted. You need to question and keep on questioning until you're satisfied.
Yeah, and that obviously is something that you speak about with regards to products and technicalities, which we'll speak to much later on, but definitely seeing those elements from the early days, it obviously, I guess will make more and more sense as we come to learn to your story and Opticare story. So you mentioned, starting a practice. So obviously we've spoken about it briefly, but if we can speak a bit more about that, most graduates, and I don't know what it was like in, late 70s, early 80s, but most graduates would avoid, and maybe now they avoid buying a practice immediately. What gave you the confidence to do it from the outset after you graduated?
Okay, well, most optometrists graduating usually work for a private optometrist, because at that stage, OPSM was still working with ophthalmologists. Mm-hmm. So all optometrists were graduating and working for other optometrists. Okay. And what made me make the change was because I've always worked with people from when I was 7 years old. I worked in retail even when I was in high school. It's something that maybe my level of confidence with optometry wasn't that great, but my level with being able to deal with people and to understand them and listen to them certainly was there. And I had no qualms about opening up.
And you mentioned the finance side of things in terms of that seems to be one thing at the time.
Yes, so my financier was my mother.
Right. Okay. And how was that early retail experience and how did it shape your approach to patient care, being a recent graduate and getting straight into ownership?
The beauty of optometry is that it's very rewarding. Biggest buzz you can get out of it is having a patient who comes to see you and can't see properly, who's got a problem. Having that patient walk in seeing 660 and walking out seeing 6.5 was truly magical. So the work in itself is very inspiring. That in itself is not enough. You need to be able to follow up. You need to be able to do the dispensing. You need to have the staff. When I opened up my practice, I was receptionist, I was fitter, and I was optometrist. Okay, I was seeing maybe 12 to 15 patients a week, so that wasn't a problem. But for the first 6 months, I was on my own.
And just on that, with regards to support, I mean, from a professional point of view, was there a network that you associated with? Was there a group that you, I guess, communicated with?
Yes.
Doing everything on your own.
What did that look like in the early days? I had good support, an optometrist that I could lean on, and also very, very close together. There was about 6 of us who actually would meet together weekly. We'd play squash together. It was a different world to what we have today. Yeah. So there was that interaction between each other as well, which was very, very strong.
Do you mean like social? Was it
Absolutely,
more of a social?
Yes. Yeah. Social. We'd go out for dinner, and we're talking weekly, not monthly. It was constant. I mean, I suppose in those days there weren't as many distractions.
Well, no, and there wasn't technology with regards to.
There was no phones. There was nothing.
No Facebook, no Instagram, no social media. So from those early days as well, getting into retail and having that experience with regards to all aspects of the business and seeing the 12 to 15 patients per week, something obviously occurred with regards to then saying, well, hold on, there's something here that needs to change. And I guess that sort of speaks back to that rule changer sort of mentality that you have. And it's fair to say that, was it an OPSM dominance over social welfare at that point in time? What was it about? I guess at what point did you start to realize that something needed to change and you needed to make a little bit of a variation with regards to what you were seeing, like the curtains in that context at that time?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, what happened basically was in Liverpool, where the practice was, the 80% of our patients were, pensioners, unemployed people, unmarried mothers. Most of the time I was writing prescriptions. Those prescriptions were actually not being filled out by me, but they were going to family and community services. And OPSM actually had the contract to make all the spectacles for these people. So really very early on, within the first 4 or 5 months, I realized this
Wow.
this wasn't a good setup. I'm doing the eye test, and to me, an optometrist is actually not only doing the eye test, he's also doing the dispensing and the and the aftercare. Basically, very early on, I realised something needed to be done. After about 12 months, looking at the possibilities of what could be done, and it's important to remember in those days, OPSN were located. All OPSN stores in New South Wales were located within the same building as ophthalmologists. So they didn't change that structure until about maybe 1983, 84, where they pulled away from ophthalmology and started employing optometrists.
Right.
I think maybe that was partly my fault because we pulled away curtains and make it said, wow, we can show frames. I don't know. But for some reason, they changed their tack. They went away from ophthalmologists and started employing optometrists and opening up retail stores.
So it's fair to say that OPSM then obviously is not the OPSM that it is now.
Absolutely. There was zero optometry. I actually, one of the ophthalmologists, I went and visited with my mother because my mother had diabetes. So I took her personally to see Dr. Gregory. And as I was sitting in his desk when he was seeing Mum, he actually had on his desk a box of frames. And he just commented, he said, yeah, look, I get a box of these glasses every 6 to 12 months. I don't even ask for them. They just bring them upstairs and they give them to me. So basically, OPSM were very close with ophthalmologists.
And ophthalmologists at the time were the main retailers of spectacle glasses. Is that right to say?
Now remember, optometry only became Medicare approved, I think around 1979.
Right.
So it's basically, yes, we weren't certified to actually, or we weren't Medicare approved until the late 1970s.
Right.
So it was a whole new venture because, of course, the reason they did that was because Medicare would save money for us to go for them to see us than to see ophthalmologists.
Yeah, ophthalmologists.
So it was, that point of view, very good for optometry, and I think that made optometry.
Now, so prior to that, what was the role of the optometrist?
People would go there, they would have to pay for the consultation privately and get the glasses privately.
Right.
So it was like seeing a dentist.
Right. Right.
Today.
Yeah, I mean, that's an observation I'd never known. So that's news to me. But I guess that's what's so exciting about the conversation, is that there are so many things that, when we start to sort of
talked about.
No, you never have. But also with regards to the influence that it's had in the industry now, which is why, we're doing this conversation over 3 parts. It's something that you've seen along the years. And for most of us, and to be fair, there probably aren't too many people going around still actively in the business of optics, that had been around in the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, there's probably a few, but, you probably list them on sort of, 1 or 2 hands from that point of view. So it's really interesting to talk about these little dynamics. I mean, specifically New South Wales here, but I guess for a larger part, the Medicare point up, it's not one that I've ever really spoken about or had made mention. So that pivot from 1979, and then obviously, through the OPSM modifying and changing, and the opportunity that you saw there, is really, really interesting. If we sort of change tune a little bit, and you mentioned that you identified that, in your case, Liverpool specifically, it was a low socioeconomic environment, so a lot of people were getting government subsidy for glasses, and obviously you weren't able to see them. OPSM had that contract. When you identified that, and you said that was quite early on, how did you go about, I guess, tackling that challenge, and what opportunity did you see?
Okay. There were a few tentacles to that one. The first one was to make an inquiry with the state government and just see what the process was. So I did that, and I had a gentleman there by the name of Lewis Causey who was very helpful. He said, look, APSM have had the contract for the last 23 years and they've got it pretty well embedded, but there's no reason why you can't. What you need to do is get the coverage of all of New South Wales. You need to have outlets. And I said, okay. So from his point of view, that's what we needed. The other thing we needed to do, of course, was to win the tender, besides having the coverage, was to put in the right pricing. And to do that, I went around to the laboratories of the day, and there were only about 4 or 5 of them. And I said, look, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you help? We got one company who was willing to do that. So I got them on side. And then I made a lot of phone calls. And it was me personally. I made them all myself. I ended up getting 138 locations within New South Wales who were willing to work and put this tender in. We called the group the Combined Optometric Practice of New South Wales, and we got the lens manufacturing company to come on side, and we submitted our first tender in 1982.
Right. Now, before you jump onto the conclusion of that, and obviously I don't know the conclusion, but what was it like communicating with the 138 stores? I mean, you obviously you reached out to the government.
They were flabbergasted. They said, wow, can we do this? I said, well, look, let's give it a go. Why not try?
Yeah.
So basically, again, that stems back from what you were saying and what I was saying. But you've got to question, you've got to look at possibilities, and you've got to try. Done what I'm done. And if you fail, not a problem. Keep going.
And obviously back then there was no, again, we've mentioned no social media, there was no mobile phones. So, you're literally, calling
The
through the
landline.
Yeah. Yeah. So that would have made it a little bit more difficult. And obviously the nature of it seems to be quite.
We didn't have faxes either.
Yeah, right. So it just made it more difficult. So you got together the 138 stores, you negotiated a supply, you obviously spoke to the government, you figured out what needed to be put together.
Yep.
And come 1982, you launched your first tender.
Yes.
What was the conclusion of that tender?
We lost it.
And what did you learn from losing it?
Try again. Anyway, the good thing with that was, and I was aware that and I think tenders may have changed now, but at that time, when you submitted a tender and you failed, you were allowed to have access to the pricing of the winning tender. So that was very valuable for us, because we had submitted for single vision glasses complete with frame and case, something like about $25, $26 complete. And we'd also actually got on side a frame company, Optics, as well. I forgot to mention, sorry. So we were getting the frames from Optics, who were based in Dubbo, Australian-made frames. Yeah, the good old days.
Yeah.
I think they were about $5 in those days. And from that, we knew what we had to do for the next tender. So I didn't give up. I said, okay, we know what to do. Let's do the second round, which is in 2 years' time. Let's prepare ourselves. The easy part for me was I'd already had the people on site, and they all prepared to go again. So that was all done. I went to the laboratories and I said, look, we need better pricing, because the winning tender from APSM was actually about $25.
Right.
So I knew my target and what I had to do. We couldn't find a laboratory. And that's how Opticare started. Opticare was formed simply to be able to tender for this contract. So it wasn't like, I want to become a wholesaler, I want to make lenses. It was basically the necessity to have the resources to get pricing at a good price to win the tender. And what I did ask people to do, ask them only, look, we're going to put these prices into this contract, and Opticare is going to put in a very low price. We need some of your private work to help support us. And I would say about maybe 20, 25% did come across at the end. So then we had Opticare started. We put in our tender in 1984. We got the contract.
So you won it.
The first time in 25 years, APSM lost it.
And just at the time, what did that represent at the time with
It
regards
was a revolution.
right to the industry, and I guess obviously to whatever it was, like trade and the print with regards to media? Was it a big thing? Was it a small thing? What was the narrative?
It was the big thing in the media. It was a big thing in the optical industry.
Right. Yeah. Optical media industry.
Absolutely. Yes. It was a big thing. And basically I was being checked out by everybody. I had heaven knows who did what. I was being checked out by customs. I was being checked out by somebody wasn't happy.
Right. Another thing that I just wanted to touch on, like we're talking, pre-1984, because this was 1984. What did the lab landscape look like in 1984? Like, obviously prior to Opticare, obviously now we're very familiar with all the suppliers and we're familiar with, what it looks like. But back then, what did it look like?
Different world. Completely different. There was no progressive lenses. They didn't exist.
Yeah.
In terms of manufacturing, it was glass.
Okay. So not even plastic at that point.
Not yet. It was just coming in. And the system for cutting the lenses was lathe cut. We were polishing with hard tools. Filthy, it was messy, it was dirty. And it was very limited.
And local, obviously, it would have been Australian-based companies, multinationals.
Yeah, we had Zeiss here. We had a company called American Optical, which is now gone here. We had Optical Products, which is basically part of Adelaide Steamships, which was based in Adelaide. They had a branch in Sydney. We had Solar Optical, actually, who started the first plastic lenses in the world. So plastic lenses originated in Australia. And of course, they were taken over by Zeiss. So it's very, not a backyard operation. It was very mechanized, but very labor intensive and very limited in product range. The process in those days was bifocals, flat top, 28, maybe not even 35 seg, just 28 seg, and clear or photochromic, PGX was called.
And had you realized at that time that you had just laid the foundations for Opticare's future and a lot of what carries through still today?
Basically, my involvement with Opticare from a day-to-day basis for the first, from 84 to about 2000, was basically very, very back-end. I wasn't involved day-to-day very much.
Right.
But what got me excited was the advent of freeform technology.
Yeah, let's not jump the gun. We've got a few more things to go through before we get to that. Yeah. All right. So I guess, you had obviously laid the foundations for Opticare and it had started. You won the tender. What did winning the tender teach you about persistence?
What I've always known.
Which is?
You keep on trying. You don't give up. And you look at options. You look at options. I mean, people have said to me, "I've got a problem." I don't view the world like that. I view a problem as having 10 solutions.
Yeah.
And okay, maybe I won't give you 10, but that's my mindset. I might come up with 3 or 4 solutions. First one doesn't work, well then you try the next one.
It's a little bit like a concept of, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And it's how you're viewing your approach to sorting it out and solving it, and the emphasis on that.
It's the personality that's a big factor. And I was lucky because my upbringing was very well nurtured. I'd seen challenges. I'd seen these being solved.
Yeah, and I think very much at that stage, with the industry and with society in general, there was a lot of entrepreneurship. There were a lot of businesses starting. I imagine a
Yeah,
lot of immigrants that first generation or just that had come across. I know in our case, the grandparents came across in the 50s and set up, and so growing up and understanding it and then taking advantage of that and that opportunity side of things was very prevalent. I would imagine back in those days.
absolutely. I mean, there was no computers.
Yeah.
All the accounts were done manually,
Mm.
invoicing
Oh,
manually, end of
yeah.
month statement
Well, yeah.
manually.
Well, that leads on to my next question. Like, so you win the tender. Obviously, you've got that's it. Like, ready to roll now. Like, the idea was great. You've figured out the mechanics of getting it done. You've got it done. But now, what do? You've got to build your team. You've got to start to deliver on the service. How did that look like, and how did you build your first team?
Um, by employing people and relying on them and their goodwill and their ability to perform. Um, the laboratory, when it first started off, had one generator and three finding and polishing machines. It was located on the second floor, about 100 yards from where my practice was in Liverpool. We were manufacturing, or we were providing all the stock lenses from the back of the practice. It was a pretty large practice that we had. So all the stock lenses were actually stored in the practice for the first, I think, 6 months. Then we sort of outgrew that. Then we moved to Chipping Norton, and that was our first industrial location.
Where did your guiding mottos come from? When the business was just starting, what were they, and what were you instilling, and do they still influence how Opticare runs today in your eyes?
I'm still doing what I do today, what I did then, but the, the rewards are much more exciting. Yeah, really, I haven't changed, but the what's possible to do now has become much more exciting and much more dramatic.
Hmm. And were there any mistakes that you made early on in those early phases of Opticare and through that whole process that still stick with you, with
Absolutely.
regards to lists that and what are they, if you can expand on it?
Um, the mistakes basically came from different issues, different aspects. The biggest issue was really people.
Mm-hmm.
I found that the honesty, the long term commitment, okay, wasn't there, and that's fair enough. But basically, what I learnt along the way was to be very wary. And I think the biggest one that I'll pass on to you, which I'm sure I've told you, is that you'll trust someone the first time. And if that doesn't work out, something goes wrong, okay, that's fine. But if you bring that person back and they do something which is not good for you, then it's your fault. So to me, that honesty and integrity has over the years been the biggest issue. And if people have been honest and willing to stay with Opticare, Opticare would be in a much better position than it is today. I don't want to go into details, but
No, I mean
there are people
it's
who have done very bad things.
yeah, and I guess it's fair to say that in 40 years of business, there are going to be some stories, right? And there's stories that I mean, I know that
We want to
normally
go,
when we're off the record, obviously there are things that can be discussed and mentioned, and obviously for the sake of whatever it may be, it's there's a way about it. I definitely sort of take what you're saying there, and
mm,
and I think maybe that sort of stems from the fact that you know sort of speaking to you and knowing the origins of Opticare and obviously yourself. When Opticare was set up, you came, and it's still a guiding principle today. It came with the patients in mind always. Like, yes, there
absolutely.
was a business component, but being the optometrist first and foremost, you had that patient care aspect. So in setting up the businesses that you had done at the time, yes, there was a financial and a commercial aspect to what you were doing, obviously, so it was
Yeah,
sustainable. But at the same time, you had the connection with the patient and you have that level of care. Now, other people that might have come after that fact, probably not optometrists, probably more business focused. And as a result, perhaps, are motivated by different things and saw opportunities and were opportunistic by nature and obviously, did what they had to do. And I guess, that's everyone's prerogative. And I guess for a large part, and as we go through our discussion, it would be nice from time to time to hear some juicy sort of stories or something a little bit interesting, but also being mindful that, you've got to be careful as to what's said from all that sort of, I guess, history.
Yes.
Okay. If we talk about optometry then versus now, paint a picture of what running an optometry practice looked like in the mid 80s, I guess, now that we've started, compared to now. And what are some of the observations that you can make between then and now?
Okay, well, basically, the optometry clinic, the consulting room, it's basically a blackboard on the wall for doing visual fields. You had a slit lamp. You had a not even a fundus camera then, I don't think. You had a slit lamp, and you had your retinoscope and your ophthalmoscope. And your ophthalmoscope and retinoscope were basically the most important tools that you had. Nothing very fancy, very basic, very simple. And autorefractors didn't come out, didn't have them at that stage. So basically you're relying on your retinoscope to get a objective refraction. So very simple, very totally different world to today.
Yeah, and I guess that speaks to the technology that has evolved over that time. And I guess from a supply perspective, both with equipment and with product, what along the way, and I think you've already sort of hinted to one, and we'll speak about it obviously much further on. But what's some of the game-changing advancements that you've seen, from those early days through to now?
Quite a few. There's been a lot of advancements. Basically, the biggest change is everything going digital. So from computerization and digital, both together, basically, it's changed the whole way things work. It's changed completely. No matter what you can think of back then, it's changed dramatically, and just like it's a totally different world almost. The only thing that's the same is the patient care. What we can do with all this advances in technology is give our patients much better outcomes. The fact that optometry also became more clinical and became therapeutic also enhanced our ability to help our patients much more. So I was only certified to do diagnostic drugs. I didn't go the next step for therapeutics, but that's okay. For the age I am, I'm quite happy. We can do now, as optometrists, virtually mini GPs for the eye. It's amazing.
And when you look back at the old ways and the way things used to work in the 80s, was there anything that you missed, or any ways, anything in particular there with how things were done then that you missed compared to now?
I mean, not really, because to me, what I can give my patients now is so much better than what I could give them then. The options, the choices, the level of quality of vision we can give now, we couldn't do in those days. Our issue now, and that's why I'm sure we'll go into later, is that Opticare's dedication is to having these new technologies applied in a way that optometrists can actually use it in the consulting room and get better outcomes for their patient. And it's still not happening. We are alone with all the multinational companies in the industry today. We stand alone in what we try and do for the patient.
They're obviously speaking at the industry in a broader sense, and obviously a lot of what we say is opinion based and our thoughts, and I think it's clear to make that, I guess, known first and foremost. But from our opinion, from your opinion, how is the shift in supply chains and I guess the corporate dominance that's come in? And this is more top level because we will deep dive how it's affected the industry from how you've observed it over the last 40 years. But from a top down sort of generalistic point of view, how has the shift in supply chains and the corporate dominance affected independence specifically over time?
It actually, we in those days we started doing multi-coating in 1994, and we were multi-coating for a lot of the smaller labs in Australia, finding that every 6 months, every 1 year, one of those labs will disappear. They'd be absorbed by OPSM. And after two or three of these chain stores disappeared, I started to say to my colleagues, "Oh, look, something's going on here. APSM are buying out all these smaller chains. There's something behind this." And people would say, "No, George, it's just APSM." What's basically they were being taken over, and I'm saying to people, "Look, something's happening here." Did happen was that OPSM had a directive, or the directors had an incentive, and it was a big incentive to build up OPSM's market share in Australia to over 51%. And then when that happened, they would be taken over by a multinational.
We obviously know that's
So basically, OPSM were basically gathering market share to get 51% of the market, which they did very well, and then they were taken over. So OPSM,
what year was that? What year was that, if you recall, roughly?
That'd be, I'd say, the late 1990s. I can't tell you exactly when.
So what did that represent, I guess, for independence at the time, and what were you seeing?
It's the start of the incursion of multinational retailers into Australia. That's what happened. So with OPSM now being a multinational in Australia, when OPSM was owned by an Australian company, it was fine. People didn't feel threatened. But as soon as we saw that happening, we knew what was going to happen next.
Yeah. Now, obviously, one thing that's happened over the last couple of years, and when I say that from the 40 years that Opticare's been around, is there is a continual recurring theme of something similar to this, and there's always change. I mean, business is all about change, and you can't stop that. What was that? What was the change that you were seeing then, and what was the narrative that was being spoken about in the industry at the time of these events occurring? Were people fearful? Were people worried? Were people like, we can't control this?
Well, I wasn't worried, but what I did try and do was to try and create this has actually happened when Essilor came into the Australian market in the mid-1990s. We actually welcomed them with open arms. Great, nice to have you here. We started getting their semi-finished product. After about a year and a half, Essilor said to not only Opticare, but to all the labs in Australia, and we had a lot of laboratories there. Maybe
how many?
25 labs, easy. A lot of them. This lens is so good and it's so difficult to manufacture, only we can make it for you. You've got to buy the finished product from us and you can on-sell it. So, do I have to explain what's happening? It's pretty obvious. So what I did after that, I employed a Raylene, can't remember her surname, who used to work with Coburn Optical, who are very big in Australia, supplying all the laboratories. I said, "Ray, I want you to go around to all the labs and let's try and form a cooperative."
Right, cool.
Where we would work together, we would source our products together, and we would be able to counter the multinational onslaught that was going to happen, or that started to happen. 2 years to try and get these labs on side. I couldn't get one. They would prefer to sell out. What happened in the laboratory industry back in the 1990s, you can take that now and bring it to today to retail.
Yeah.
Exactly the same.
Well, I know it's something that we've spoken about quite a lot. And I think, back to that question, the mid-90s, I mean, obviously, as Opticare was really sort of kicking into gear, you did see this, what came to be, I guess, globalization of things. And from that point of view, the multinationals came in and that corporate dominance started to set in its way. And that's obviously a narrative that was very much the case then and obviously has developed since. And we are going to speak about this a little bit more when we speak about, the next phase of Opticare. And as Opticare started to grow and evolve, this episode is specifically focused on the beginning and the origins and I guess a bit of the motive. So if we take a little bit of a reflection on those early years, in the first couple of years, Do you think the spirit of Opticare today still matches that vision that you had when you first started it?
Absolutely. And I am, and that's why I'm still here, because I can see that there is a need for us to be here. What's happening is we're all being dumbed down by the multinationals. We're being fed marketing hype. I mean, there's marketing truth, there's marketing hype. And I go through that. I want to give facts to my patients at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I guess if you had one sentence, how would you sum up the spirit of Opticare in those early days?
In the early days was finding the establishment and giving the optometrists a go.
Still seems to be the case today as well.
Absolutely. So, except for it's a much more challenging task.
Well, with those independents, you said, you formed that alliance, and we will speak about it a little bit further, and I'll have a few more questions about it. Yeah. But with those labs that you approached at the time, I mean, obviously I know the answer. I think most people that are listening will know the answer to this question. But how many of those labs still exist today?
Maybe one or two.
Right. Okay. So there's a few. I was expecting zero, to be fair. So, and how many were there? Like how many would you have approached?
There were about 5. Zeiss was here as a laboratory. Zeiss as a lab has gone. Zeiss is back here now in a different form. American Optical was here as a laboratory. We had optical products. That's gone completely. I think maybe Hoya was just starting up early days.
They're multinationals, right? I mean,
yes.
When you say so I'm speaking about the independents,
the small guys.
Yes, the guys that you tried to sort of put together. The alliance that you formed when you noticed what was happening. How many independents would have been around? Chapman Davis is one.
20 labs around, but small labs doing.
Yeah. Well, that was the nature of the industry back then. Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of small labs around, and that's what you sort of came together. And how many of those small labs still exist?
I would say 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 to 5 max.
Okay. So still a few, considering I thought it would have been, like I said, much lower.
Well, there is Hastings, there's us, there's CR, there's RX Safety.
Yeah. But did they exist in the mid-90s?
Late 80s? They existed, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. I mean, CR obviously did. Yeah, so that's I guess I mean
I'm going back a long time, mate.
No, I know it is a while ago, but I mean it is it is part of the optical history, I guess, for in some capacity, or definitely how you've viewed it. But I guess as we start to evolve the conversation and we start talking about the industry after, sort of as Opticare started to evolve, and without giving too much away, what's one story or moment from Opticare's later years that you think best captures how the business has evolved in those early days or from those early days?
I would say that the event that got us to where we are today was a OAA conference I attended in Cairns in the mid-2000s. This was given by a lecturer from the States, optometrist called Louis Catania. And he basically just opened me up completely in terms of what is possible to be done. He talked about refracting and the fact that the eye could easily differentiate a refraction in less than 0.25, and he gave us evidence where we could clinically assess refractions in 0.18 optosteps. And to me, that blew my mind, saying, wow, I make lenses, but I only do 0.25 steps. That basically erupted into what we are today. And we are creating our software programs in those lower options. We are trying to cater for the best options we can give, and taking what's available with technology and going to the nth degree with it. Because we are who we are, we can do that with any restrictions. We don't have to answer to a corporate entity. I mean, Opticare is me and you. That's it. So we can decide what we want to do, and there's no restrictions on us, and it gives us the freedom to do that And that's something that I have always cherished to be able to do all my life, and I'm still doing it.
Well, as you mentioned, control your own destiny, I think. And so
Absolutely.
that's the essence that's still there. I definitely, knowing what I know and hearing you say that, and again, I've obviously heard you mention that particular lecture that you attended, it totally makes sense how that resonates with the way that we've evolved and the company that we've become. Obviously, there are positive and negatives with regards to the structure that we have. I think one of the, so it's not that it's all, it's all positive. There is obviously challenges, definitely that present, but definitely understanding the context of that and what that did and how that's translated into our offerings and I guess what Opticare
Huge.
speaks about today. It's instrumental. So I'm really excited to sort of deep dive that in our next episodes. But yeah, thanks so much for talking today
My
with
pleasure.
regards to
Thank
the
you for having
origins
me.
and looking well. We will be speaking again soon with regards to, I guess, the evolution of Opticare after it started. But it's been a pleasure having you on, Dad. So looking forward to the next
Yeah,
episode.
your son. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to The Focused View. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe on your preferred podcast app, and share it with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals across Australia. For additional resources and downloads, visit thefocusedview.com.au. I'm Michael Nasser. Until next time, keep focused.